We are so thankful to be here tonight. Like Laura said, we really are thankful to our friends from the Church of God Chapel for opening their house to us, this beautiful house where the Lord meets with them, and we can meet with Him together tonight. So we're super expectant of what God is doing and what He's going to continue to do. I'm actually super excited tonight because I get to speak about one of my favorite Bible characters, other than Jesus, of course. Joseph has always been a character that I love. I just love his story. And if you haven't been coming to Flourish for 7 years, our very first Flourish, I spoke on Joseph. I don't know why I'm getting emotional. That's not going to happen tonight. But it is such an encouragement, even to my life, especially right now, and I know a lot of you know it's a season of uncertainty for us, but it's such a beautiful reminder of God's intricate work in our lives and how He's weaving everything with such perfect purpose in everything that happens in our lives. Now, if you haven't heard the story of Joseph, I don't know where you have been, because there's even a movie about him, okay? Like DreamWorks even said, this sounds like a good movie. And they made a movie, so I would certainly encourage you to go back and actually read it for yourself, because we're not going to read the whole thing. We'd be here forever. But it's an amazing story. But if you have heard about him, you know probably why Disney didn't pick it up, because it's not a fairy tale. It's at least 13 years of his life were very difficult. They were not Disney-worthy, Instead, we see that his life was marked with hardship and betrayal and suffering and uncertainty and waiting. And a lot of his suffering actually came from people that were closest to him, which is super difficult sometimes to think about. Now, the Bible introduces us to Joseph in Genesis 37. And like I said, it is a really long story. So I'm going to narrate a little bit, and we'll jump in certain spots to glean from the text. But we are introduced to Joseph at the tender age of 17. And he is the beloved son of his father Jacob. And Jacob is not trying to hide this. He is basically just announcing to the world that he is his favorite, okay? He makes him a special coat of many colors, and this is not his only son, but it was the firstborn of his beloved Rachel. But Joseph does have 11 other brothers who were very aware of the favoritism happening in their households, and this made Joseph quite unpopular with them, okay? Now, the plot thickens a little bit when Joseph not only is the favorite of his father, he's already, detested by his brothers, but then God gives him dreams, okay? We find the 17-year-old dreaming dreams about the future that he's going to have, and he sees himself with his brothers surrounding him and bowing before him. And he doesn't have the maturity to keep it to himself. He goes, listen, I had a dream. And guess what you were doing? You were bowing before me. And then he goes and said, I had a second dream. And what was happening? The sun and the moon and the stars were bowing before me. And so his dad is like, you gotta bring it down. He actually rebukes him. He actually says, you need to not be saying these things. But the Bible says he kept it in his heart. So his dad kept thinking about what this meant. Now, we know that these dreams came from God, and that they were giving Joseph a vision into his future. I don't know, it doesn't really say if young Joseph actually interpreted the dreams or knew exactly what was going to happen, but he receives this calling from the Lord at 17. But it certainly did not mean that he was ready to walk in this future and purpose at 17. I truly doubt, however, that he could have ever imagined what the road from calling to purpose was going to be for him. Soon after the dreams, his brothers become increasingly angry and jealous, to the point where one day, when Jacob sends Joseph out to the fields to find his brothers, he would send him every now and then to check on them. Jacob wasn't helping the situation here. But still, he sends him out and he goes to check on his brothers. And when they see him coming, they are actually so angered that they begin to plot to kill him. And they were going to cover it up from their father. Let's jump in here. I want you to see it with me. If you have a Bible, you can go to Genesis 37, verses 19 through 24, but otherwise it will also be behind me on the screen. So they say, "Here comes that dreamer. You can feel the love." They say to each other, "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him in the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe that he was wearing, and they took him and threw him in the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water. So they do this to their brother, and then they sit down to eat, like it's a normal thing. They sit down to eat, and whilst they're eating, they look up and they see this caravan of merchants that is approaching. And they have a fabulous idea. They say to themselves, "Let's sell him. Because why would we kill him? Let's make money off of him." So in verse 26, we see, Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." Wow, thank you. His brothers agreed. They all said, "That's a better plan. Let's just sell him, get rid of him." So they did. They sold him for 20 pieces of silver, and they didn't think about it anymore. But when Reuben came back to look for him, and he didn't see him, he panicked. He thought, "What are we going to do? What am I going to tell my dad?" Well, they agreed that they would lie to their dad, and they would tell him that a wild beast got him. So to make their lie very believable, they dunk his beautiful coat into some animal blood and brought it back to the dad. So far, this is where we see things take a turn for Joseph. This is the start of his journey to Egypt. At 17 years old, he is thrown from his father's house, where he was the favorite, mind you, to the house of Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Now, this is an important detail, so try to keep it there, okay? And he is sold as a slave. Overnight, his entire world changed. Honestly, if I were him, I think I would have been tempted to think many times in his journey, what happened to my dreams? Were these from God? Where's God and his calling on my life fit here? But I want you to read with me on Genesis 39. And we're going to see a phrase repeated over and over in his story. Chapter 39, verse 1 says this. "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there." What does it say here? Can you read it with me? "The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered." No, that's okay. You don't have to read the whole thing. That was it. Thank you, though, for the enthusiasm. I love it. The Lord was with Joseph. Honestly, to our untrained eye, it might seem like, where was God? But God was with Joseph, and even in this, he prospered him. Even in this, as a slave, even in a foreign land, even in the house of somebody he didn't even know, he prospered him. It says his presence was with him. And look at verse 3. It says, when his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household and entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything that Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. I love it. I absolutely love this because it says that the blessing of the Lord was so obvious in his life that even an Egyptian who didn't even believe in God, who had no idea who God was, saw there's something about this young man. There's something about this guy because everything he does prospers and everything that he touches turns to gold. God must be with him. It's amazing. Now, remember, he's like 17. His situation is not optimal, but the nearness to God in his life was evident. He must have heard and it was their custom to tell each other about their ancestors and their relationship to God. So he had to know about his father's relationship to God, about his grandfather's relationship to God, about his great-grandfather's relationship to God. But God was not just their God. It was Joseph's God. It was his God, here in a foreign land, sold as a slave, separated from his people, betrayed by his brothers. Joseph flourished in the toughest of places. Honestly, he could have grown bitter. He could have been angry. He could have been despondent at how things were turning out. But he walked with the Lord, and he did what was right in front of him to do. And he did it to the best of his ability. So maybe here in Potiphar's house, he thought, okay, I have a good master, I have a good position, things are going well, maybe this is how things get better. But if you know the story, you know it's only about to get worse. So let's jump in. Genesis 39 again. We're going to go from verse 6. I love it. I love the Bible, okay? I love the Bible. I just love it. I love how it just tells us things, right? Joseph was well-built and handsome. He couldn't have been ugly, guys. He had to be handsome. So after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. No qualms, this woman, okay? But he refused. He refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I then do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day, he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. Honestly, this woman, things are starting to look up. Joseph has a steady job, things are going well, he's, running the house, and she just pesters him day after day after day. Sin with me, might as well say that. Sin with me, Joseph, and he could have. Obviously, Potiphar wasn't around much. He could have done it. He could have given in. He could have thought, you know what, I'm going to keep my job if I do this. Maybe I'll just keep her happy too. Maybe I don't risk it anymore. What a lesson for you and for me. to stand firm and decide to do what is right before the Lord, especially in difficult circumstances. Because when you are in a difficult season, you better believe it, that the enemy is going to come at you and he's going to tempt you with an easier way out. He's going to put things in front of you to tempt you to not stay faithful to the Lord. And our hearts are deceiving. Your heart can tell you, it's just a lie. It's just a little bit of this. You're just cutting a corner. Nobody will know. But God will know. And Joseph knew that. Joseph knew that, and he walked with the Lord, and he did not give in. But not only did he not give in, what did he do? He ran. He ran out of there. He was like, take my shirt. I don't even care, lady. He just ran out the door. And what did it get him? It landed him in jail. Not what you would think, right? You would think, oh, I'm doing the right thing for the Lord. Surely everything will be great. Sometimes you land in jail. Hopefully not you, but you know. Joseph did the right thing, but she didn't. She wanted to cover herself up, so she lied to protect herself. She was probably mad that he didn't give in. She was rejected, so she lied. She told her husband that Joseph had tried to take advantage of her. And like, I guess, most husbands, he believed her. Or at least he acted like he did. He became enraged and sent Joseph to prison. So let's read it right here. When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, what happened? You can read it out loud. The Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all of those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. I hope you're seeing the thread here. The presence of God in Joseph's life never stopped. Never stopped. It almost seems like a contradiction. How would God bless me in prison? How would God bless me as a slave? How would everything I do succeed in this horrible spot in my life? What is happening here? He landed here unfairly after trying to do the right thing. Honestly, would you not have been tempted to think, nothing goes right in my life? How did I end up here? God, what is happening? When are my brothers going to be bowing down to me? You know? Like, how am I going to get out of here now? However, there was something about the life of Joseph that made people trust him, that put him in favor everywhere he landed, that promoted him without him even trying. It was the life of God in Joseph that even in the darkest places of his life made him thrive. We don't hear much from Joseph's mouth in this story, in the account of his life, but his testimony speaks volumes. This is a man that got to know God, and it showed everywhere he went. He didn't have to tell everybody, I have God, I'm a Hebrew. No, he just walked in, and there was something about Joseph. And it wasn't that he was handsome. Something more, okay? Now, you and I, because we know the story, we know that at this point, he's very close. It's getting closer. We're getting close to his destiny. But he didn't know that. So he is here in prison, and we're going to jump in Genesis 40 and see what happens next. It says, sometime later, we don't know how long, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. And after they'd been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night. Each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked the officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dream." I love it. I love that in prison, he's actually exercising the gifts of the Spirit. Like he's finding that he's gifted at this, and he trusts the Lord to do this through him. So he does. He listens to their dream. We're not going to go into the dreams because it would be too long. But long story short, I'll tell you how it ends. The cupbearer is released in 3 days and restored to his position, and the baker's dream got so well for him. He was released, but then he was executed. So Joseph got to tell them this. This is what's going to happen with you. So we jump again into verse 20. It says, "Now the third day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all of his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation." And then verse 23 always makes me angry. "The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. When Joseph interpreted their dreams, he told them, 'When you get out, remember me and tell them about me.' What did he do? He forgot." Every time I read that, I'm like, dude, how hard was it to just say, there's a guy, he knows things, whatever, get him out. But he did not. But then I get myself together, and I remember that Joseph's times were not in the cupbearer's hands, or in Potiphar's, or in his brothers. His time, his life, his future was in God's hands. God himself had planned out his life. And the truth of the matter here is that it would be 2 more years before he got out. He was in prison for 2 more years until one blessed day, Pharaoh has a dream. So Pharaoh begins to dream, and obviously nobody can interpret it. And then, behold, the cupbearer remembers. 2 years later, bless you, okay? So he's there holding the cup, and he goes, "Oh, I've done a horrible thing." He literally does say that. "I've done a horrible thing. When I was imprisoned, there was this young Hebrew man who interpreted my dream, blah, blah, blah. Here I am. Please, he can help you." So Pharaoh is like, "Okay, none of you can help me. Let's call this guy." They clean him up, they shave him up, and they bring him to see Pharaoh. And this is where we jump in Genesis 41. Verse 15. "Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it.' 'I cannot do it,' Joseph replied to Pharaoh, 'but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires.' So Pharaoh proceeds to tell him his dreams. And Joseph is not only able to interpret the dreams, but also gives him a detailed plan as to what he should do with these dreams, because God was warning Pharaoh about an incoming famine in the land. And everybody would starve to death if nothing was done. So let's see what happens here, okay? I'm going to jump into verse 33. "And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest Egypt during the years of the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh, to be kept in the cities for food. This should be held in reserve for our country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed like a good plan to Pharaoh and all of his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man? One in whom the Spirit is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all of my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." To us, this is a story that we skim through in maybe 30 minutes. But this was 13 years of his life. It tells us a bit later that he was actually 30 years old when he starts working for Pharaoh. So if you do the math, it was 13 years. But it was a 17-year-old boy who got a dream, a calling from God, but he didn't have the character to carry it out. Those 13 years were necessary. Those 13 years refined him. They formed him. They prepared him. They were necessary in the life of Joseph. The secret, and I want you to hear this, the secret in Joseph's life was that he chose to stay close to God through those 13 years. And God did a work within him, a work greater than anything that he would do later through Joseph. God was the secret. Pain changes us, that's true. But it's not always for the better. Pain alone, suffering alone, can make you bitter, can make you angry, can actually make you move away from the Lord. But it's God in the pain. It's God in the unknown. It's God in the brokenness. It's God in the prison. It's God in the betrayal. It's God that made a bitter situation sweet with himself. It's God in all circumstances that made Joseph better and not bitter. A man that walked with the perfume of God. A man that God could trust. And a man that trusted God. So the question for us is this: how are we going to respond when things happen in our lives? Because that's what makes all the difference. Are we going to trust the Lord and invite him in, or are we going to push away from him? I want to emphasize that not a single detail of Joseph's life escaped God. And he was not a moment late. Maybe you find yourself in a season or a circumstance or a weight that you just can't make sense of. Maybe you're wondering, where is God? And why hasn't he done something yet? Or why is God allowing this? This was never part of my plan, that's for sure. But we have a choice here. You and I have a choice here. We either cling to Jesus and we welcome whatever the day may bring. Whatever circumstances come into our lives, whatever delays, whatever waits, whatever unknowns. Because we know that they will thrust us into the arms of Jesus. Or we distance ourselves. We clamp up and we try to do it ourselves. And we allow our pain and our disappointment to anger us and make us bitter and pull us away from the Lord. Now, I do want to put a disclaimer in here. We cannot put on God the sins of people. The people in this story and in your story made their choices. There's people who sinned against Joseph, and God will take care of that. I'm sure I already did. It's been a long time, But if people hurt you or offend you or are not right, that's a God thing. You don't have to concern yourself with that. But we don't say this is God's fault. He did that. No. People make choices. But God is over people's choices. And you will see that because he says it himself. People sometimes have evil intentions or they make mistakes. But God is even over all of that. Don't you forget that. That nothing escapes the Lord. He works through and above and around people's mistakes and evil intentions for your good. Because that's what he was doing right here. I want you to remember that. Because Joseph was in the middle of God's will for his life, his whole life. Especially those 13 years. For us, it would be like, there's no way. But God was in the middle of all of it. And I'm going to recap it for you so you see the thread. We're going to walk through it together because had he not been sold and that caravan that just happened to go by, if that caravan hadn't taken him, he would have never ended up in Potiphar's house. He needed to arrive there. And that crazy lady needed to hit on him and he needed to reject her, thank the Lord, so that he would end up in the prison. But it wasn't any prison. It was the king's prison. Specific, very specific. He had to be there. He had to be in Potiphar's house so that he would end up in the king's prisoner's prison, you know what I mean? And that in that prison, at that very specific frame of time, so that he would meet the cupbearer inside of that prison. So that he would hear his dreams and interpret the dreams, and then be forgotten for 2 years. Can't forget that. And then, at the very perfect time, Pharaoh has his dreams. And guess what? Joseph is ready. He's ready. God's been weaving it. He's been moving it all along, from here to there, from here to there, to take him straight into where he needed to be. There was no coincidences. There was no happenstance. It was the hand of God. Just at the right time to be brought into Pharaoh's presence, right when he needed to interpret his dreams. The king of the nation opened the doors for him. He opened the doors for him and he said, "Bring him to me." Joseph went through all those years, and God didn't just physically get him there. But most importantly, God prepared him for it. Joseph was ready. His destiny was so much bigger than himself. God prepared him to save not only Egypt, but so many lives. The life of Israel, the life of all the Israelites, and on and on and on until you and I. This is a chain reaction. His part that he had to play, he had to go through this. It was masterfully designed by the Lord to take him exactly where he needed to go, but he first needed to be refined and transformed and made into everything that he would need to be to fulfill his purpose. Ladies, I am preaching to myself. The unknowns are hard. The wait is hard. The difficult seasons are hard. Not knowing the next step can feel so overwhelming, yet I have to remind myself that if I am walking with Jesus, I am right where I need to be. And so are you. He is weaving. He is doing his thing to create a magnificent tapestry that hopefully one day I'll understand. He knows not only where he's taking us, but he knows what our hearts need before we get there. He knows how to make you and me into everything He has designed us to be. How to free you. How to free me. I don't know about you, but I want to be free. I don't want to walk around with the wounds of my past. I don't want to walk around with things that are hindering me from walking in the freedom and the peace and the purpose of God. And it's been in the hardest seasons of my life that have brought me the most growth and freedom if I walk them with Jesus. Because when I've chosen not to, I became bitter. But when I choose to hold on to Him, when I welcome Him into my pain, when I welcome Him into the hard places, He makes them sweet with His presence. And that's the only way that the pain changes you for the better, when we invite God into it. Please read the story for yourself later. But I'm just going to take us towards the end here. I want to point something out. Long story short, his brothers were hit by the famine, and they were starving. There was no food back in Canaan, so they end up coming to look for food. And they need to purchase it from Joseph. Here's the dream, right? They meet Joseph. They don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. And eventually, he reveals himself to his brothers. And I just want to read 2 verses to you from when he finally reveals himself to his brothers, and the other one is from when his father finally passed away, and they got so scared because they thought he was just being nice because his father was alive. So let's see it. Genesis 45, verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourself for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5, there will be no plowing and no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve you a remnant on earth, and to save lives by great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me the father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all of Egypt. And in Genesis 50, this is when the dad already died. They're all living in Egypt. It's supposed to be good, but they're still scared because they knew what they did. So we read in 50:19 of Genesis. It says, "But God replied, 'Don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me. But what? But God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children.' So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them." That sounds like a free man to me. That sounds like a man that is not holding any grudges. He is healed. He is free. He is living in his purpose. God has done a work. He went through some serious family trauma, some intense betrayal, backstabbing, loss, loneliness. You throw it in there, he went through it. Yet his heart remained tender and kind at the end of it all. This is what God does. So tonight, I just want to give us a space right here to invite God into whatever circumstance you're going through. I'm going to guide us through a prayer, and it's called the welcoming prayer. And maybe we can turn on the little pad or something and just pick around. But I'm going to guide you through a prayer And as Joseph did, let's welcome God into all areas of our lives. Let's stop fighting what is our reality right now. Maybe you are in a circumstance when you're like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in this circumstance. I want something to change. Where is God? I don't know. But instead of fighting God on it, why don't you invite him into it? That's where change happens. That's where healing happens. That's where transformation happens. It's not that we don't pray for change or for God to do something, but we stop trying to control everything. And we open ourselves up to the only one who can truly control everything and change us. So I'm going to read through this prayer, and it might pop up behind me. But I just want you to even just close your eyes. Just you and the Lord. And I'm going to read it through, but there's going to be a moment when I read phrases that say, I let go of. And if the Lord shows you something, you can almost just do it with your hands. You can say, I let go of. Release it. Release it to the Lord. Whatever God is showing you, release it to him today. Relinquish control, because my friend, you don't have it. And then at the end, you can just open your hands and receive God's love and invite him to do a work in your heart. So I'm going to read it for us. It says, welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome everything that comes to me today because I know it's for my healing. I welcome all thoughts, feelings, emotions, persons, situations, and conditions. I let go of my desire for power and control. I let go of my desire for affection, esteem, approval, and pleasure. I let go of my desire for survival and security. I let go of my desire to change my situation, any situation, condition, person, or myself. And I open to the love and the presence of God and God's action within. Amen. Lord Jesus, I just pray for these women right here, right now. God, I pray that they would see you weaving, threading, moving in their lives. God, that as they wait, that as they go through difficult circumstances, as they go through things that they cannot understand, may they be reminded that you, your presence, your nearness, you with them here in the prison, in Potiphar's house, in wherever they may find themselves, is the changing factor of it all. That you made bitter things sweet with your presence. May you meet them here. May you find them here. May they find you here. And may they make it the pursuit of their hearts to walk with you, to let you do your work in them, so you can take them and you can make them everything you want